My name's Steve. I'm 32, single, and, apparently, not deserving of my own inheritance. I wasn't planning on making a Reddit post about this because, honestly, writing it down just makes it feel more real, and I've spent weeks trying to convince myself this wasn't actually happening. But after what happened over dessert last Sunday, after the way they looked at me, like I was some outsider at my own family table, I need to let it out. And if you've ever had a family that smiles while slowly cutting you out of your own life, you'll understand. To give you a little background, I'm the only child of what most people would call old money. My parents, especially my father, come from a long line of business owners, generational wealth that goes back to my great-grandfather who built a timber empire in the early 1900s. We're not flashy about it, no yachts or supercars, but we've always been comfortable. Think multiple properties, a private family fund, and a vacation home in Aspen that nobody visits anymore because it's too rustic. I grew up thinking all this was normal. The trust fund was something they talked about with casual authority, like the way some parents might remind their kid to floss, just one of those expected life routines. I didn't lean on the family money. I was raised to work hard, and I did. I got my MBA, started a mid-sized logistics company with a few friends from college, and grew it into something I'm proud of. It's not a billion-dollar unicorn, but it pays my mortgage and then some. I thought I had earned the respect of my family. I thought I had proven I wasn't just another rich kid floating by on a last name. But lately, something shifted. It started subtly, like a draft coming in from under the door. You don't notice it at first, but over time it chills you. My parents, especially my mother, started dodging my calls. They said they were traveling more, which didn't make sense since they hated planes. My father started talking about legacy all the time, not in the warm, nostalgic sense, but in this cold, transactional way. A legacy only matters if it's maintained, he'd say, usually while swirling a glass of scotch and looking out the window like a low-budget Bond villain. The weirdest part? They kept bringing up my cousin Rachel. Rachel is my Uncle Martin's daughter. We were close as kids, but life drifted us apart. She got married straight out of college to a guy in the military, popped out 3 kids by the time she was 28, and has spent the last decade in and out of financial chaos. They move constantly, always chasing some new job or cheaper rent. Every Christmas, she shows up with a different hair color and a new tale of how she almost got scammed by an MLM, but saw through it just in time. She's not a bad person, just impulsive, scattered, and perpetually unlucky. I've helped her out financially more than once, including a $12,000 loan she never brought up again. But lately, my mom started comparing us like we're contestants on some twisted family game show. Rachel's doing her best, she'd say pointedly. It's not easy with 3 mouths to feed. And then she'd give me that look, the one that says, "What have you done lately that's so impressive?" Fast forward to last Sunday. We were at my parents' house for what I thought was just a normal family dinner. It was me, Mom, Dad, Grandpa, my dad's father, 85, sharp as a tack, never misses a dinner, and my parents' lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, who I assumed was just there socially. That wasn't unusual. Caldwell's been part of our family's inner circle for decades. He used to bounce me on his knee when I was 5, back when lawyers were just friendly old men with candy in their pockets. Dinner was strange, tense, the kind of quiet where the clink of silverware feels like a gunshot. Grandpa kept clearing his throat like he wanted to say something, but every time he opened his mouth, Mom would shoot him a warning glance. Finally, after dessert, my favorite cherry cobbler, which now tastes like ash in my memory, my mother put her fork down and said, "There's something we need to tell you, Steve." Now, usually when my mom says that, it's about some family friend getting divorced or someone's kid dropping out of Yale. But the tone, sharp, like a blade being unsheathed, froze the room. She reached for her napkin, dabbed her lips like a TV villain, and said, "Your inheritance is going to someone more deserving." I blinked, thinking I misheard. More deserving than your own son? My father didn't look at me. He just gave this smug little smile and said, "Your cousin's kids need it more." You know that feeling when your stomach drops before your brain catches up? That's what happened. My heart started pounding in my ears, drowning out the room. But before I could even process what they were saying, before I could ask how or why or what was happening, my grandfather, who had been deathly silent the whole meal, slammed his cane down on the floor so hard the table rattled. "Say their names," he barked, voice shaking with fury. "Let's hear this nonsense out loud." The silence that followed was suffocating. No one moved. My mother looked like she'd been slapped. My father finally spoke, but his voice was tight. "There's no need to dramatize this." "Then say it plainly," Grandpa growled. "You're stealing from your own son to fund what? Rachel's daycare bills? Her next failed business idea? She's family," my mother snapped. "And she has responsibilities." I stood there, still seated, hands clenched under the table. The words weren't forming fast enough. All I could think was, this can't be happening. This is a joke. A test. Some kind of twisted loyalty experiment. But it wasn't. It was very, very real. I didn't speak the rest of that night. Not a word. I just sat there, quiet and still, while they peeled back layers of betrayal like it was some mundane estate planning update. My chest felt tight, like I'd swallowed a rock whole, and my brain kept looping the same thought over and over. My inheritance is going to Rachel's kids. Kids who don't even know me. Kids I've seen maybe twice in the last 5 years. Kids who call me Steven because Rachel never bothers to correct them. The family fund, set up by my great-grandfather to support future generations, had always been handled a certain way. Every generation added to it. No one took from it without consensus, especially when it came to permanent redistributions. It was supposed to be protected, a legacy carefully passed down, not something you carved up like pie because someone was drowning in credit card debt again. After the cobbler had congealed on our plates, after Grandpa's outburst and the awkward silence that followed, my parents calmly explained their decision. They'd restructured the trust. Without telling me. Without even including me. And apparently, they'd done it months ago. Caldwell was there to smooth the transition, to walk me through the new structure and long-term vision for the family's legacy. All legal, all signed, and all done behind my back. I remember sitting there in that suffocating dining room, surrounded by people who shared my blood, yet felt like strangers, and watching Caldwell slide a sleek leather folder across the table. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I could see the edge of the first page, my name scratched out. Another clause below it with Rachel's name. And then, beneficiaries, primary, Charlotte, Mason, and Lily. Her kids. That was the moment something in me cracked. I got up and left without saying goodbye. Grandpa tried to stop me at the door, grabbing my arm with surprising strength for a man his age. His eyes, blue, sharp, and filled with fire, searched mine. "You don't let this stand, you hear me?" he whispered. "Don't you dare let them walk over you like this." I nodded, but I didn't speak. Because I didn't trust my voice. It was taking everything in me not to yell, not to scream, not to flip the entire dining table onto the polished hardwood floors and demand someone look at me. I walked out and drove home in silence. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my balcony staring out at the city skyline, my thoughts spinning like a hurricane. I wasn't even thinking about the money. Okay, maybe a little, but it was more than that. It was the erasure. The fact that they'd made this decision without even consulting me. That they'd handed my legacy, the one I'd spent my life honoring, to someone who treated responsibility like it was optional. Like it was a costume she could take off whenever things got too hard. The days that followed were worse. That dinner had been the opening act. 2 days later, I got a text from Rachel. "Hey cousin, just wanted to say thank you. This means the world to me and the kids. Hope you're not too mad. You're such a good guy." I stared at the screen, my jaw tight. I didn't reply. That night, I got a call from my mother. "Steve," she began, in that patronizing tone she reserves for teachable moments. "You're being dramatic. This isn't about you. It's about doing what's right for the family." "Funny," I said. "I am family. Or did you forget?" There was a pause, and then she said something I'll never forget. "You don't need the money. Rachel does. Her kids do. And frankly, Steve, you've always been self-sufficient. We assumed you'd understand." Self-sufficient. Like that was a crime. Like because I didn't make a mess of my life. I didn't deserve what was promised to me. I hung up without another word. But it didn't stop. A week later, I found out they'd done more than just adjust the family trust. They'd also changed the beneficiary on my father's life insurance policy. Guess who's listed now? That's right, Rachel. Not even her husband. Just her. My father, the man who taught me how to swing a bat, how to balance a checkbook, how to shake a man's hand with confidence, had erased me. I tried to reach out to Grandpa again, but he wasn't answering his phone. When I finally drove over to his place, his housekeeper told me he'd been taken to the hospital. Minor chest pains. Stress-related. I wasn't surprised. That dinner had shaken him too. At the hospital, he looked frail, smaller somehow, but his grip was still strong when he took my hand. "They're fools," he said, voice raspy. "You've been the only one holding this family together for years. You think your father handled the quarterly reports on the fund? That was you. You think Rachel even knows what a portfolio is? She spends money like it's cursed if she holds onto it too long." I smiled weakly, but my heart was heavy. "It's not just about the money anymore, Grandpa. It's about the fact that they didn't even tell me." He nodded slowly. "That's because they knew you'd fight it. And they didn't want to fight. They wanted you to accept it quietly. Well, they weren't going to get that." Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated. Rachel posted on Facebook about how blessed she was to be finally seen by the family. She made a post with her kids holding a tacky cardboard sign that read, "Thank you, Nana and Papa," complete with glitter and dollar signs. She tagged everyone, including me. The caption? "Grateful for those who understand what real family means." I nearly threw my phone across the room. Then came the final blow. My parents hosted a private family luncheon. Not the whole extended group, just inner circle family, according to the invite. I wasn't included. Neither was Grandpa. But Rachel was. And so were her kids. Grandpa found out and was livid. He called me that night. "They're rewriting history," he said, "making it look like you've always been distant. Like you've never cared." "Let them," I replied bitterly. "They'll choke on their own fiction eventually." But the next part? That was the breaking point. The moment I snapped. 3 days ago, I got a call from Caldwell, the family lawyer. He sounded uneasy, like he didn't want to be making the call. "Steve," he said, "I'm just the messenger here, but I wanted to give you a heads up. Your parents have submitted paperwork to remove your access to the Aspen property." I blinked. "Come again." "The family vacation house. It's being signed over. Full rights to Rachel. Retroactively. They're claiming it's hers now. Something about it being promised to Martin Side years ago. Your father's pushing hard on this. That house wasn't just real estate. It was memories. It was summer hikes with Grandpa. Snowball fights with Dad. Quiet mornings sipping coffee on the deck, watching the pines sway. It was ours. Mine." I hung up. I didn't even let him finish. That was it. That was the betrayal that lit the match. They hadn't just taken the trust. They hadn't just rewritten the will or shifted policies. They were erasing me from everything. Every memory, every legacy, every inch of this family's story. Like I was some footnote they regretted including. I felt something shift inside me that night. A cold clarity. A quiet resolve. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to yell or plead or write long, emotional letters trying to make them see me again. No, I was going to show them exactly who they had cast aside. The days after that call were quiet. Almost too quiet. It felt like a storm had passed and left me standing in the wreckage, not yet sure whether I'd survived or just hadn't noticed the roof caving in. I kept going to work. I took my meetings. I answered emails. I even smiled at the receptionist like nothing was wrong. But inside, I felt hollow. The Aspen house had been the final thread. And now that it was cut, I didn't just feel disinherited. I felt disowned. I didn't tell anyone at work. Not yet. The team had just landed a contract with a major retailer and morale was high. I couldn't bring that weight into the office. But I noticed I was staying later. I'd keep the lights on long past everyone else had left, just sitting at my desk with a bottle of water in one hand and a spreadsheet open in front of me that I wasn't even reading. Just staring at the numbers, hoping they'd distract me. Some nights, I'd drive past my parents' house. Not because I wanted to go in. I just needed to see it. Needed to remind myself that it was real. That this was the same home I'd grown up in. The same place where I learned to ride a bike. Where I buried my first dog in the backyard with Dad helping me dig. And now it felt like a museum I didn't have a ticket for anymore. One night, I parked a block away and just sat there, watching the windows. I saw Rachel's SUV in the driveway. Her kids were running through the front yard like they owned the place. My mother came out at one point, laughing, holding a tray of lemonade like some 1950s sitcom mom. Rachel hugged her. The kids tackled my dad from behind, and he grinned like he was starring in a Hallmark commercial. I watched it all from the shadows, a ghost at my own family gathering. That was the lowest point. I went home that night and sat in the dark. Didn't turn on the lights. Didn't take off my coat. Just sat on the edge of the bed with my head in my hands, thinking, maybe I really am the outsider. Maybe they were right to give it all to her. But the thing about hitting rock bottom? You stop caring what the fall looks like. And that's when you start climbing. The next morning, I woke up early before my alarm. I made coffee. Not the usual drip stuff, but the good stuff. The French press I hadn't touched in months. I sat on the balcony and watched the sunrise. And I made a decision. If they didn't want me in the family anymore, fine. I'd build something they couldn't ignore. I'd rebuild, not just my career, which was already solid, but my legacy. I started with the trust. Not the family one. That was gone. But I had my own investments. My own holdings. A portfolio I'd quietly built over the last 10 years, partially inspired by watching my grandfather manage the family's assets with precision and care. Real estate, stocks, a few angel investments that were just beginning to show promise. Nothing flashy, just smart. That week, I sat down with my financial advisor and told her I wanted to restructure everything. Create my own fund. Something long-term, multi-generational. Not to pass down to random relatives who text me twice a year, but to support causes I actually care about, and maybe one day, if I had a family of my own, to give them something earned, not expected. It's funny, she said as we wrapped up the meeting. You're the only client I've had restructure like this before the age of 40. I shrugged. Guess I just got a head start on losing my faith in people. I focused harder at work, too. Not just staying late, but doing the kind of deep, focused work I hadn't done in years. I streamlined operations, negotiated 2 contracts personally, and helped close a major acquisition that got our company into a new regional market. The board noticed. Quietly, I was being considered for a permanent seat. But beyond the numbers, something else shifted. I stopped apologizing. For years, I'd made myself smaller around my parents. Less ambitious around my dad, so he wouldn't feel threatened. Less proud of my accomplishments around my mom, who only praised Rachel's resilience while treating my wins like chores on a list. But now, I stopped shrinking. I started owning it. I donated to a scholarship fund in my grandfather's name. Quietly, anonymously. But he found out. Called me a week later. You've got your great-grandfather's spine, he said. He'd be proud. I know I am. That call meant more than anything my parents had said in years. And speaking of Grandpa, I started visiting him more. Weekly, sometimes twice. We'd sit on his back porch, sipping iced tea, talking about everything and nothing. He'd tell me stories from the old days, how my great-grandfather built the business from one mill in Vermont, how my dad used to sneak cigars in the barn, how I used to cry every time I lost at Monopoly because it's just not realistic to lose everything over one bad roll. He laughed when he said that. I didn't. He was the only one who hadn't changed. The only one who still saw me. One day, as we sat watching the sun dip behind the trees, he said, I kept a copy of the original trust. I turned to him, stunned. You what? I may be old, but I'm not blind, he said. I knew your father was pulling strings behind your back. So I kept records. Legal ones. Original drafts. Signed documents. The kind that say you were always meant to be the successor. I stared at him. Why didn't you say anything sooner? He sighed. Because I wanted to see how you handled it. If you'd fall apart or rise. I didn't know what to say. He handed me a small envelope. Use it wisely. Inside was a copy of the original trust language. Not just naming me as the primary heir to the family fund, but also granting me co-ownership of the Aspen property, an amendment he'd had drafted himself, years ago, with my father's signature right on the page. They'll say it's outdated, he warned. They'll fight it, but they won't win. I sat back, staring at the paper. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just rebuilding. I was rising. Not to take revenge, at least not yet, but to remind them that I hadn't disappeared, that I wasn't the ghost they thought they'd buried. In the weeks that followed, I kept rebuilding. Quietly, strategically, I reached out to a real estate contact in Colorado and began exploring nearby properties to purchase. Not to replace the Aspen house, but to surround it, to box them in, little by little, until they had to see me every time they looked out the window. I filed paperwork to expand my company's logistics routes through their town. I didn't need the location, but it was symbolic. I was making moves in places they'd tried to erase me from. And the best part? They had no idea. Not yet. But they would. Because the next family meeting was coming up. The annual fall estate gathering, hosted every year by my parents, held at the Aspen house. The invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock with embossed gold lettering, like always. Same cursive font. Same faux elegance. You are cordially invited to the annual Langston Family Legacy Weekend. It might as well have said, you're invited to the scene of the crime. I turned the card over in my hands, studying the return address. Aspen, Colorado. The family house. The house that, until a few months ago, I thought I'd one day pass down to my own kids. Now it was Rachel's. Or so they thought. I put the invitation down and opened my laptop. The tab I'd left open was still there, Colorado property records. Parcel maps. Zoning laws. Over the last few weeks, I'd quietly acquired 3 adjoining plots next to the Aspen house. One was an abandoned lot, the second a retired couple's vacation rental they hadn't used in years, and the third was a sliver of forest the city had forgotten about. Nothing massive, nothing flashy, but enough. Enough to make a point. It was time to go from rebuilding to reclaiming. The first move was legal. My grandfather's envelope wasn't just symbolic, it was ammunition. I scanned every page, made digital copies, and handed the originals to my lawyer, Natalie. I've known her since college. Brilliant, fierce, and the kind of person who could carve a loophole out of marble. This is solid, she said, flipping through the pages. Your father's signature is here, dated and witnessed. These amendments weren't revoked, they were ignored. Can we challenge them? I asked. Not just challenge, she smirked. We can unravel what they've done. Natalie drafted a letter to Caldwell, the family's long-standing lawyer. A formal notice of contest. Not a lawsuit. Not yet. But a legal assertion that the amended trust my parents filed was in direct violation of a prior version, one that hadn't been properly nullified. Caldwell responded within 2 days. His tone was measured, but I could read between the lines. Panic. I was not aware of the prior documentation, he wrote. If valid, this complicates the current estate structure. Complicates. That was his word. I called it karma. The second move was emotional. Strategic. A conversation with Grandpa. You ready for them to hate you? He asked, as we sat on his porch one last time before I flew out for Aspen. They already do, I said. They just smile while doing it. He chuckled, coughing into a handkerchief. Then make sure they remember why. We clinked glasses, his bourbon, my iced tea. Before leaving town, I called 3 people. People who mattered. People I'd kept at arm's length for too long. The first was my old friend Marcus, a photographer turned entrepreneur who owed me a favor from way back when I helped fund his first studio. I asked him if he'd be willing to come to Aspen that weekend. Just bring your gear, I said. No questions. The second was my college mentor, Elaine. She'd become a financial analyst at a think tank in D.C., but she was more than that. She was respected. The kind of person whose word carried weight in legal and corporate circles. I sent her copies of the documents and asked her to be my eyes if things got messy. The third was my assistant, Jordan. Loyal, sharp, and discreet. I'm going to need backup, I told him. You in? Always, he replied without hesitation. I flew into Aspen 2 days before the family weekend. I didn't go straight to the house. I went to the other properties. My properties. The ones I now legally owned. The lot to the west was empty, just pines and dirt. But it had the best view of the family cabin's deck. I stood there, imagining them sipping wine, laughing, clinking glasses, completely unaware that the land they were looking at no longer belonged to them. The house to the east was a charming 3-bedroom rental. I had the locks changed and left a note for the property manager. Owner arriving this weekend. No guests allowed without permission. The third lot, narrow and wooded, was barely a 1/4 acre, but it ran parallel to the family's private trail down to the lake. That trail was now mine. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just paperwork filed in silence. I booked a room in town rather than staying at the house. I wanted them to feel my absence before I made my presence known. The morning of the event, I showed up precisely at 11 a.m., wearing a gray suit and sunglasses, not out of vanity, but because I wanted to look untouchable. Jordan followed behind me, wheeling a sleek black case with 2 laptops and several neatly organized files. Marcus was already nearby, posing as a guest photographer for the event. He had a drone. I didn't ask what he planned to do with it. I just smiled. The gate buzzed as we approached. Name? The staffer asked, clipboard in hand. Steve Langston, I said, removing my sunglasses. Her eyes widened. She looked down at the list, then back at me. You weren't confirmed. That's funny, I said, stepping past her. Because this house is still partially mine. Technically, I was right. While the new deeds hadn't been updated officially, the legal dispute had been filed. That made ownership a gray area, and no one wants to play chicken with a lawsuit at a family event. Inside, the atmosphere was festive. Caterers buzzed around with champagne flutes. My mother wore a cream dress that matched the table linens. My father stood by the fireplace, laughing with two of his golf buddies. Rachel was on the back patio, holding court with a group of relatives I hadn't seen since college. Her kids ran barefoot across the deck like it was a playground. And not a single person noticed me, at first. Then my father turned. His smile froze mid-sentence. "Steve," he said too loudly. The room quieted by half a decibel. "Didn't expect to see you here." I shrugged. "It's a family event, isn't it?" He moved toward me, slow and careful. "We thought you declined." I didn't respond. I corrected. "There's a difference." My mother appeared beside him, her mouth pinched like she'd tasted something bitter. "We hoped you'd respect the boundaries we set." "Oh, I respect boundaries," I said, voice calm. "In fact, I've been investing in them." Their brows furrowed. Before they could respond, I turned to Rachel, who had finally noticed the shift in energy. "Hey, cousin," I said. "I hope the kids are enjoying the house." She smiled uncertainly. "They love it here. It's been such a blessing. We're so grateful." "Grateful enough to give it back when the paperwork comes through?" I asked, just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Silence. My father stepped forward. "Let's speak privately." "Of course," I said, gesturing toward the study. Jordan followed us in and quietly closed the doors. "What are you trying to prove?" My mother snapped the moment we were alone. "That I don't go quietly," I said. "And that I'm not the fool you think I am." My father scoffed. "You're not entitled to anything." "That fund was illegally restructured," I interrupted, "without proper revocation of prior documentation. Caldwell knows. He's already responded." "You're vulnerable." They both froze. "You're bluffing," my mother said. I slid a folder onto the desk. Inside were printed emails, legal drafts, notarized amendments, all signed. My father reached for it, flipping through the pages. His jaw tightened. "I don't want this to get ugly," I said. "But I'm prepared if it does." "You wouldn't sue your own family," my mother whispered. I met her eyes. "You stopped being my family when you decided Rachel's chaos was more worthy than my consistency. When you tried to erase me." The door creaked open. Grandpa stepped in. "He's right," he said, voice low. "And if this goes to court, I'm testifying." My parents looked stunned. "Cornered." "I suggest," Grandpa added, "you enjoy the weekend. Because come Monday, you'll be hearing from his legal team." And just like that, I had the upper hand. But that wasn't the end. That night, as the party died down and the guests trickled out, I made one final move. I invited Rachel for a private walk. Just us. Down the trail to the lake. The trail to the lake was quiet. Just the crunch of pine needles under our shoes and the soft rustle of trees swaying overhead. Rachel walked beside me, still clutching her wine glass like it was a security blanket. Her heels weren't made for this path, and she stumbled twice before finally giving up and going barefoot. I didn't slow down. "So," she said after a minute, "what's this about?" I stopped halfway down the trail, right where the trees opened up just enough to reveal the lake, glassy and still, reflecting the gray-purple hues of dusk. We were standing on what used to be the edge of the family's private land. Used to be. I turned to her and said, "You know this trail doesn't belong to the house anymore, right?" She frowned. "What? I own it now. Bought the strip last month. It was classified as city overflow property. Abandoned easement. You wouldn't know to look for it unless you were trying." She blinked, clearly confused. "Why would you do that?" I smiled. "Because I want you to understand something. Everything my parents gave you, every gift, every restructured deed, every dollar, wasn't theirs to give. It was built on something older. Something that was meant for people who respected it, who earned it, who understood it wasn't just a payday." Her face changed. The bubbly cousin act dropped. In its place, I saw a flicker of fear. Maybe for the first time, she realized I wasn't playing anymore. "You're trying to scare me," she said, voice shaking just slightly. "No," I said. "I'm just making sure you're aware of what's coming. I'm not here to take what's yours. I'm just reclaiming what's mine." I turned to leave, letting her stand there with her wine and her confusion and the dawning realization that things weren't going her way anymore. The next morning, I left Aspen before sunrise. I didn't say goodbye to my parents. I didn't need to. The gears were already turning. 3 weeks later, they received the formal notice of the lawsuit. Natalie handled everything with the precision of a surgeon. The trust documents Grandpa gave me weren't just persuasive, they were bulletproof. With signatures, witnesses, and filing dates, we established that my father had violated the terms of the original trust by reallocating funds without full beneficiary consensus. That included the Aspen house, which was still, legally, under disputed ownership. Caldwell folded quickly. He knew he'd been complicit, even if unknowingly. His firm settled out of court to avoid the embarrassment. My parents, on the other hand, weren't so lucky. The court issued a temporary freeze on all asset transfers. Rachel was forced to vacate the Aspen house while the dispute played out. The house she'd claimed so publicly, on social media, in family emails, even in a local lifestyle magazine interview, was no longer hers. The article had quoted her saying, "This place represents stability, finally." I imagine the retraction didn't feel so stable. I didn't want the house out of sentiment anymore. I wanted it because they didn't want me to have it. There's a difference. Once the ruling was finalized and the property reverted back to me, I sold it. Not to profit, but to sever the last tether. I donated every dollar of the sale to two charities. One that helped military families get stable housing, and one that provided business grants to single mothers. I made the donations under Rachel's kids' names. I didn't tell anyone. I just did it. Meanwhile, my parents' social standing began to unravel. At first, it was subtle. They weren't invited to a few usual charity events. Some board positions became rotational and quietly rotated away from them. Word had gotten out that they'd tried to cut out their own son, their only son, in favor of a niece with no financial discipline and a mountain of personal debt. Their allies, many of whom had known me since I was a kid, stopped picking up their calls. Grandpa didn't just testify in my favor. He spoke publicly about the importance of integrity in legacy families. That interview made the rounds in certain circles. People noticed. The fund, after the legal dust settled, was put into a new trust. One I controlled. I kept the structure tight, conservative, protected. I wasn't interested in revenge spending or hollow victories. I wanted to make sure it could never be misused again. My parents didn't speak to me for months after the court ruling. Not a call. Not an email. Nothing. I figured that was for the best. But then one afternoon, I got a letter. A real one. Handwritten. It was from my mother. It started with 2 words, "We're sorry." She didn't ask for money. She didn't beg for forgiveness. But she did admit they were wrong. That they thought I didn't need them. That they mistook my independence for disinterest. That they let guilt over Rachel's situation cloud their judgment. I read the letter 3 times. Then I put it in a drawer and left it there. Because sometimes closure doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from choosing peace over participation. Rachel, for her part, moved back to Arizona. She sent a few emails, half apologies laced with passive-aggressive commentary. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She'd already lost everything that wasn't truly hers to begin with. As for Grandpa, I made sure he saw the results. I showed him the new trust, the new protections, the donations, the portfolio. He nodded, satisfied. "You've done it," he said. "You restored what they tried to destroy." And I had. But more than that, I'd rebuilt something even stronger. Not just a financial legacy, but a personal one. Boundaries. Self-respect. Clarity. I wasn't just the forgotten son anymore. I was the architect of my own future. And when I walked out of that courtroom for the last time, papers in hand, sun hitting my face like a spotlight, I realized something. The best revenge is becoming impossible to erase.